In various cultures around the globe, you will come across intriguing tales of mysterious human-shaped shadow beings. These enigmatic creatures are often depicted as male figures draped in black capes, topped with a mysterious black hat. Their presence is usually silent, yet their impact on people can range from protective and reassuring, to utterly terrifying. Some accounts suggest that they serve as benevolent guardians, while others describe them as mere spectators of our lives. Yet, in some of the most spine-chilling reports, they are portrayed as malevolent entities that strike fear into anyone who crosses their path. Whether they are here to guide us, observe us, or haunt us, the mysteries surrounding these shadow beings continue to captivate and terrify us. What are these shadow beings? Why do they appear to some and remain invisible to others? And what drives them to interact with us in the ways that they do? These are just a few of the many questions that we'll be exploring in this video. So, sit back, relax, and prepare to be captivated by the enigmas of the shadow realm. Before we continue, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Have you ever experienced the feeling that someone is watching you? The hair on the back of your neck stands up, and you turn around, expecting to find someone staring at you, but no one is there. This is scopaesthesia, a phenomenon where one can sense someone staring at them without any physical cues. It's believed that humans developed this ability over thousands of years to detect predators and potential threats, but today, it's a rare occurrence. However, in the mountains of California, there is a place where feeling this sensation is almost guaranteed. Locals have known this phenomenon for centuries as the darkwatchers, a group of shadowy entities or spirits that appear as tall figures during sunset or twilight. They often wear wide-brimmed hats, capes, and sometimes carry a cane, but their faces are never seen. Witnesses describe a penetrating gaze that seems to follow them, leaving them with an eerie feeling of being watched. Some even report piercing bright red eyes, adding to the unsettling nature of the darkwatchers. As you hike through the trails in this area, you can't help but wonder who, or what these mysterious beings are, and what their purpose is. Are they guardians or malevolent beings? Do they observe us out of curiosity or with ill intent? The mystery of the darkwatchers adds to the allure of this unique and haunting location. Although there is talk of the possibility that this paranormal phenomenon is merely psychological hallucinations, it is surprising that different people in different parts of the world coincide in their descriptions. In the United States, the legend of the darkwatchers dates back hundreds of years, with various versions. There is the Native American perspective as well as that of the settlers who came to these lands. Although sightings have been reported in several other places, many of them occur in the Santa Lucia Mountains in the Central Coast region of California. There, most witnesses only report the uncomfortable feeling that something or someone has been watching them. Some have tried to interact with the watchers, but trying to approach them is useless. Apparently, they disappear if someone gets too close or looks directly at them. However, there are people who claim to have interacted with them and even communicated with them. Some legends suggest that the darkwatchers may have supernatural powers, and many believe that these beings rarely show themselves to people carrying electronic devices, such as phones or cameras. It's possible that the Chumash were the first people to include the watchers in their legends. The Chumash were a Native American tribe that inhabited the coastal region of Southern California. They believed that the darkwatchers were the spirits of deceased Chumash who watched over and protected them from the tops of the mountains. The following two stories are real accounts from people who claim to have seen the darkwatchers while exploring the mountains.
One day, a friend and I were driving back from LA. We passed by the San Luis Obispo Reservoir and saw something at the end of the mountain. It looked like a really tall human figure, but it wasn't. It had a black cloak like death and was holding a staff. It was daytime, so I knew it wasn't a person. These dark observers are real. Elizabeth.
One day, I was hiking in the mountains near my home in Bled, California. As I followed the trail, I felt like someone was watching me and the hair on my arms stood up. I turned around, worried that it was a mountain lion, but at the top of the mountain, I saw a hooded human figure. I couldn't see its face. The hood and robe seemed torn and tattered, and it made no sound. I turned around and went back the way I came, and I never went back to that part of the mountain range again. Dan.
In the mountains of Germany known as Broken Peak, this phenomenon occurs frequently and is attributed to the effect of shadows in the mist at certain times of the day. However, this does not explain cases where the effect disappears immediately when it is looked at or observed directly. In Colombia and surrounding countries, this phenomenon is known as the man with the big hat, or the legend of El Sombrero. The story tells of an old man who lived a long time ago. He always dressed in black with a hat. He rode a horse of the same color, and never spoke to anyone. It is said that the old man was often found on the sides of the roads, and although it has been a long time since his death, people still feel his presence, never causing harm. He just appears and disappears mysteriously. Physically, he is described as an old man with a big hat, an opaque face, and is always watching from a distance. Legend has it that El Sombrero, or the man in the black hat, always arrives at full gallop at night, accompanied by cold winds, and disappears quickly. Some say that he chases after drunkards and cheats. On nights with a full moon, it is easy to confuse him with the shadows cast by branches and trees. Another way in which the man in the black hat manifests himself is through dreams. He usually appears as a dark figure in the shadows, sometimes just observing with his penetrating gaze, and other times communicating a message. However, there are instances where his visit is full of hatred and evil, and apparently his intention is fear. It is this last version that inspired the creation of one of the most iconic horror movie villains of all time, Freddy Krueger from the Nightmare on Elm Street series. According to its creator, Wes Craven, he was inspired to create the character after reading a newspaper article about a group of young people who died in their sleep after suffering from nightmares. However, the article was not the only source of inspiration for Krueger. Craven also based it on his own childhood experiences, where he was terrorized by a shadowy figure wearing a hat, whom he believed was a murderer. The combination of these experiences and his vivid imagination led to the creation of the infamous villain. The legend of the Darkwatchers has been around for centuries and has fascinated people all over the world. The famous American author John Steinbeck recounts that in his family, the legend of the Darkwatchers was something of a family obsession. His son Thomas later co-wrote a book about the Watchers with the painter Benjamin Brode. In his short story from 1938, a character sees a black figure looking down at him from a nearby crest, but he quickly looked away, for it was one of the Darkwatchers. No one knew who the Watchers were or where they lived, but it was best to ignore them and never show interest in them. Despite the fact that many dismiss the existence of these dark beings as mere legend, there are many reports from people who claim to have had encounters with them. From feeling their penetrating gaze on the back of their neck to actually seeing their shadowy figures, these experiences have left a lasting impression on those who have witnessed them. The mystery of the Darkwatchers continues to captivate and intrigue people around the world. In this part of the video, we delve into eerie experiences of individuals from all around the globe, who claim to have had encounters with these mysterious dark beings.
This story happened to me when I was little. I know some of you have encountered it or seen it. Some time ago, I was at my grandmother's house. My entire family went out to buy dinner, and they left my cousin, my newborn cousin, and me at home. My cousin was watching the computer, and after finishing using it, he let me know that he was leaving. In my grandmother's house, there is a space that we call Zedagala. When I turned to the kitchen, I saw a tall shadow, with a large coat, a hat, and a cane. It was completely black, and I got scared. In my grandmother's house, supernatural things had happened before. Suddenly I couldn't move, and I started crying, but I was crying loudly. They arrived running, and the first thing they went to see was my cousin, thinking that something had happened to me, but she was okay. When my mother saw me like that, she hugged me and asked why I was crying. I was pale and couldn't speak, but later I told them what I had seen. A few days later, they did a cleansing of the house.
This happened in 1978. When I was a child, I saw a man in a black hat. At that time, my mother, sister, and I lived with my grandparents due to the circumstances we were living in at the time. I remember that other relatives also stayed at my grandparents' house, and for this reason, we had to share beds. That night, my sister and I slept in my grandmother's bed. I was sleeping in the middle of them, with my head at the foot of the bed, and I had a terrible nightmare where the drawers were constantly opening and closing on their own. I woke up terrified from that dream, looked around the room, and only took the time it took my eyes to notice a dark silhouette in the shadows at the head of the bed. I thought that what I was seeing was just a shadow of something in that room, and that my mind was showing me something else because I was terrified by the nightmare I had just woken up from. But then I began to notice more details in that shadow. The man wore a long cape, a cane, and a top hat. He had no eyes because he had no face, but I felt that he was looking at me fixedly and intensely. Terrified, I tried to wake up my grandmother, but no matter how hard I tried, she wouldn't wake up. Except for the movement I made to try to wake up my grandmother, I was immobile with fear. After what seemed like an eternity, that faceless figure raised his arm and pointed at me. He had no mouth, but I heard him clearly when he said, "This is your last chance." After this, the man lowered his arm and disappeared right in front of me. The next day, still terrified, I told my mother what had happened to me the night before. To my surprise, my mother stopped what she was doing and her face changed, showing a lot of fear, as if she knew exactly what I was talking about. Then she took a breath and told me that the same thing had happened to my aunt several times, but she didn't tell me anything else.
I'm from Chile and I have also encountered that man. When I was about 8 years old, I stayed overnight at my grandmother's house in the countryside. It's a fairly old house, without doors and with thin curtains in their place that let you see what's on the other side. She lives alone, so only her own bed is available for sleeping. That night, we lay down together. It was around 1 in the morning, we were already in bed, and I was still awake, but quite tired. When between blinks and thanks to the street light that filtered through the window, I saw a black silhouette behind the curtain. It was a tall man, dressed in a long black coat and a top hat on his head. He was there only for a few moments, immobile. I froze and instinctively closed my eyes. When I opened them again, it was gone. I think my grandmother noticed that something was wrong, so she asked me what had happened. I didn't tell her anything, just that I had had a nightmare.
This happened a long time ago, but here it goes. I was around 7 or 8 years old. It was a night when I couldn't sleep, I was tossing and turning and nothing worked. Suddenly, I was very thirsty, so I went downstairs to get a glass of water. When I saw the microwave, I saw the time, it was 4 something. Anyway, I went back to my room. It should be noted that there is a window near the stairs that shows the backyard and my dogs. I don't know what happened to me, but I wanted to see my dogs to see if they were sleeping or what they were doing, and I saw a shadow. It was a tall man with a hat. I was scared when I saw him, but I still went to my room, but I couldn't sleep very well. Much later, I remembered what had happened to me and looked to see if there were people who had gone through the same thing as me, or mainly, what that shadow was that I saw that night. I saw that those shadows were called shadowpeople, and that some people had also seen that man with a hat.
I have been seeing this man with a hat since I was a young child. I vividly remember seeing him when I was around 7 years old, standing in the forest with a little girl. There was no movement. He was just very still. And I mentioned to my grandmother, who was walking with me at the time, that the little girl had a beautiful pink dress. I repeatedly asked my grandmother why they were alone in the forest. She ignored me. My grandparents always tell me stories of how I used to see a man looking at me through the window. I remember the man used to stand in my backyard just looking at me. He never moved or spoke to me. He was just always there looking at me. I was never afraid of him as a child. I was just confused. The last time I saw him was about a year ago. I woke up at 3 in the morning to take a sip of water and felt something watching me. I looked around and saw this shadow figure looking at me. He was wearing a hat, holding some kind of briefcase, and was extremely tall, about 7 feet tall. I was very scared and hid under the blankets until it was gone. In the morning, I asked everyone in the house if they had been watching me while I was sleeping, and everyone said no. Every day, I am afraid to go to sleep. I know he won't do anything to hurt me, but it's creepy.
I saw him when I was 15 years old at the end of my bed. Then I drew him for a while. I wish I still had my drawings. The house had a ton of activity. I didn't really talk to many people about it and didn't know others were seeing it too until I found this subreddit. It just looked at me from the end of the bed. I didn't feel scared, it just seemed curious and I didn't feel any negative energy, unlike some of the other encounters I had in that house. It was the only time I saw a figure and the feeling was curiosity from both of us, rather than the malice I felt from the other entities in the house that I experienced. I've seen hat men hundreds of times. I'm not sure exactly when I started seeing them, but I know that from age 14 to 24 I would see them once every 2 weeks on average. I would wake up in the middle of the night and see hat men or shadow people staring at me. I have had sleep paralysis a few times before, usually if I took a nap during the day, so I know what that feels like. I wasn't experiencing sleep paralysis when I woke up and saw the hat man. I wasn't paralyzed, I could move and speak fine, and I'm sure I wasn't dreaming. These things I saw were always completely black humanoid figures, and although they didn't have facial features, I knew they were looking at me. Most of them wore a fedora-type hat, but I also saw many that didn't wear hats. The ones that visited me varied between 1.5 and 3 meters in height. They all made me feel fear and terror, but the taller they were, the deeper the terror. The ones without hats didn't seem as bad as the ones with hats. Usually, they just stood still at the door, next to my bed, or at the end of it. Every time I saw them, I would jump on the bed and scream with all my might. This was my natural reaction. Usually, I would see them for about 20 seconds before reaching for a source of light. Turning on the lights made them disappear visually, but I still felt strange afterwards. Every now and then, I would see them peeking around me during daylight hours, but nothing sustained like what I saw at night. I also lived in 4 different houses, and stayed at many friends' or boyfriends' houses, and during these 10 years, they followed me everywhere. It's pretty embarrassing to try to explain this to friends and boyfriends at age 18. At some point in my 20s, things started to get worse, and not only did I see the hat men more frequently, but I also think they were playing with me, especially when I was home alone. The TV and lights would turn on and off inexplicably, objects would disappear and reappear in strange places. I would hear loud crashing and banging noises, and of course, there was nothing there. One night I was sitting watching TV and the large glass window in the living room spontaneously shattered. I am talking about a large window that shattered in the middle of the night in the living room right in front of me. There were no birds, animals, or children with stones. The worst experience I had with a hat man was the only time he moved. I wasn't sleeping well and was living in a state of nerves. In the past few months, when I saw him, I would get very angry and shout and swear at him and even hit him. Usually, he would just stand there for a while and then leave or disappear when I turned on the light. But this time, instead of standing still, he lunged at me. I was boiling with hatred and I absolutely believed that this hat man was evil. It was the first and only time I had seen his arms and hands. He was very thin and his arms and fingers were abnormally long. When he lunged, I noticed that he was floating towards me, and he went for my throat with his long fingers. I stopped screaming and kicking because I was in shock, because this thing was now moving, when he had always been a silent observer. When he got to my neck, my husband turned on the light. Then it seemed to turn into a mist and pass through the wall. I also want to add that I once saw a different figure in the middle of the night. It was a white, nebulous figure, and it didn't scare me at all. I wasn't disturbed that it was there, and there was no bad energy or feeling of doom. I was confused about what it was doing there, but it wasn't the same as a hat man. After a decade of sleepless nights due to several hat men, I was desperate to get rid of them. I tried asking them kindly, I tried talking to them like a civilized person, I tried explaining that they were hurting me. I tried shouting, I tried ignoring them, nothing. I ended up confiding in a friend, and it turns out she had seen similar things to me. She told her sister, who is a weaver. The sister gave me 2 tarot readings, and both times got the same message. I don't remember exactly what it was, but basically she said I had an evil spirit attached to me, and gave my friend some crystals for me. To be honest, I laughed it off at the time, and if anyone asked me in person now, I would still laugh it off. But the truth is, I have never seen them again after they gave me those crystals. It's been about 5 years, and nothing strange has happened to me either. It's like everything suddenly stopped. I know how irrational it sounds. I like to tell myself that I don't believe in spirits, and I certainly don't believe that crystals can ward them off. Rationally, I know it's more likely that I imagined everything, that it was some sleep disorder, or stress in my life causing hallucinations. All I know is that for me, it was as real as everything else I see in the world day to day, and it was horrible. At the end of the day, I'm glad that the man doesn't visit me anymore.
These are just a small part of the testimonials from people who have had experiences with these beings around the world. Perhaps we'll never know what shadow beings, dark watchers, or men in black hats really are. Perhaps we won't even understand the motives behind their visits, and why so many people around the world report having seen them. Let us know in the comments if you would like us to make a video with more stories about these encounters. And if you have an experience to share, please do so with us. If you enjoyed this video, remember to give us a like, and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.